This video was brought to you by my loyal patrons. Pledge today and you can participate in choosing what video comes to the channel next. Link in the description. A few months ago, I made a video talking about 10 of what I think are hidden gems from the CGI era of Thomas and Friends. I feel the CGI era of Thomas has this stigma attached to it, that it's a downgrade compared to the era before where everything was filmed with models on sets. In that video I talked about how the CGI era had a pretty bad start, and I think that tainted a lot of people's views on it. Though as it went on and new writers and producers came aboard, the show eventually found its footing. The CGI era has a lot of pros to it, with exceptionally great episodes sprinkled throughout its entire run. That video did pretty well, and I enjoyed making it. People tend to enjoy these more positive videos where I spotlight good episodes, so I figured, why don't we do another one of these? Here are 10 more hidden gems from CGI Thomas. Just like before, we're going to stray away from the well-known greats like Tit for Tat and Love Me Tender, as the point of these videos is to shed light on episodes that people don't really talk about that often, and I think that are still worthy of praise. This list will be in no real order of ranking, it's just 10 more episodes that I think are worth being talked about, and that you should definitely check out. So without further ado, let's get started.
Have no fear, the buses are here!
Starting off strong with a Bwubba episode, and one of the best ones in my opinion. In the previous video, we only covered episodes from the Renaissance era, seasons 17 to 21. So I think for this video we should spread our horizons a little bit, and cover some of the gems outside of that era, cause there are a good few. Free the Roads feels straight out of that Renaissance era of the show, with no involvement from any of the major changes. No international shenanigans, none of the new characters, and a cast entirely made up of faces from the classic era. The only Big World Big Adventures element present here is Thomas being the narrator.
Bulgy the bus carries passengers around the island.
Which, admittedly, still feels wrong to me. This episode spotlights Bulgy. That's right, Bulgy. A character who has not been relevant since Season 7. The fact Bulgy returned in CGI is kind of amazing. He's a character that no one expected to see again, or really asked for. Yet, he survived. Stronger than ever. In this episode, Bulgy is up to one of his schemes to take down the railway. He accidentally causes a bag of soil to land in the water tower.
Uh-oh.
Which works to his advantage as he watches Thomas take on water from it. Sure enough, the contaminated water causes Thomas to break down, and the buses are all called in to take over for him. For Bulgy, it's a dream come true. That is until Birdie suffers engine trouble, and Bulgy has to take on all the passengers, which, you guessed it, causes him to bend an axle. He gets found out, and is taken to be repaired. By rail. A just end to his little scheme. I just love how Bulgy is characterized in this. At the beginning, he tries to secretly convince people to ride him, like he's creeping in the shadows trying to sell drugs or something.
Is your train late?
It's so funny. Even the fantasy sequence, which are usually total cringe in these episodes, is pretty hilarious. Birdie and Bulgy being depicted as superheroes is such a so dumb it's funny concept.
The buses are here!
I never expected to see these two of all characters wearing eye masks. It's so fun to have a road-focused episode in CGI, cause that is a real rarity. That never happens. We got lots of Bulgy in this, we got some Birdie in this, some Max and Monty, even a nice Butch cameo.
Where's Butch the tow truck?
I'm still dumbfounded at how this episode exists at all. In the era of Big World, where the committee agreed gimmicky stuff was pushed first and foremost, a slice of life episode with an old fan favorite character as the lead seems to be counterintuitive to that. Yet, it still got greenlit, and I'm so happy it did. It's a real blessing. Michael White wrote this episode, and he once again proved he is the glimmer of light in this era of the show. All his episodes are the highlights for sure, and I think this is one of his best entries. I've no doubt that a lot of fans checked out on the modern stuff when the Big World era started, so I recommend giving this one a watch if you haven't already. It's a very entertaining one.
That's not a danger signal. Those are red.
I would describe Old Reliable Edward as a remake of a very mid episode, turned into a good episode. In my Season 6 retrospective, I said my least favorite episode of the season was Edward the Really Useful Engine, for a number of reasons. I didn't like that Gordon was now suddenly being a jerk to Edward again, I didn't like how the plot didn't really make any sense, and I didn't like how Edward was barely a main player in his own episode. In that episode, Gordon is rude to Edward. Not to Edward's face, mind you. Edward has no idea any of this is happening. Percy's the one who gets upset, so he tells his driver, and then his driver tells Topham, and then Topham comes up with this convoluted scheme to teach Gordon a lesson. He has Duck take over Edward's work, because he somehow knew the trucks would cause Duck to stall on the hill, which would then block the express. So Sir Topham Hatt willingly delayed the express, and that would mean Edward would have to come to the rescue to save them. It doesn't make any sense when you think about it for more than a few seconds. Edward is totally unaware of the conflict and has literally 2 lines of dialogue through the whole episode.
"But sir," he asked, "who will look after the freight cars?" "It's good to be back," Edward chuffed happily.
Old Reliable Edward is basically a remake of that. It's virtually the same exact plot, but with some elements switched around to make it a stronger character-driven story. It's like writer Andrew Brenner saw that episode and said, "You know what? This episode sucks, so I'm gonna redo it and make it better." This time, Gordon is rude to Edward to his face, belittling him even after Edward helps him out.
You're so old and slow, I'm surprised the Fat Controller keeps you on.
Aren't you even going to say thank you?
Edward shares his frustration with Thomas, and the two come up with a scheme to pay Gordon out. Instead of Edward barely being a part of the story now it's Edward himself taking matters into his own hands. I love that he and Thomas team up to play their trick, giving us a rare glimpse into their friendship, something that is rather overlooked in the show. Edward was Thomas's first friend on Sodor, and I think it's pretty sweet that as soon as Edward tells Thomas Gordon was being a jerk to him, Thomas's immediate reaction is to get even.
Maybe it's time we taught that big engine a lesson.
You mess around with my friend, you deal with me. The trick goes off without a hitch. Thomas gets in front of Gordon one day, slows on the hill, and intentionally causes him to stall. Gordon begs Edward to help him, and Edward refuses it, leaving Gordon in a position of total helplessness.
I promised not to call you old or unreliable anymore! Please!
If we're to compare this to the Season 6 episode, Gordon never begs for help or seems remorseful at any point. He's just angry the whole time. Edward saves the day, and then Gordon only apologizes because Topham told him off. Here, there's no obstacles or other characters meddling between the two. The conflict is totally face-to-face, and Edward, on his own terms, puts Gordon in a corner to apologize. I'm still not a fan of Gordon still being a jerk to Edward this late in the game, but whatever, you can write that up to this being the CGI canon, where Gordon never really grows or changes. Overall though, I really like this episode. It's a really strong Thomas and Edward episode in my opinion, showing off both of their true characters. Thomas is a cheek with no boundaries, and Edward is an unappreciated underdog that teaches through humility. Put these two together, and they are unstoppable. All the characters are really strong here, even Annie and Clarabelle, who have pretty minor roles. I love how they both show some worry when Thomas begins his trick.
I do hope you know what you're doing, Thomas. We don't want to look silly.
And it's kind of clear that they don't exactly know what the plan is. Then, as Thomas slows on the hill and the trick starts to work, We get this shot of Clarabelle smiling, almost like it just hit her. It's like she's thinking, oh, that's what Thomas was trying to do. Clever. A real sleeper hit in season 18, I think. I never see people talk about this one.
We must hurry to the Whispering Woods to pick up some logs.
But Winston didn't answer, because Winston wasn't there.
Winston?
This is a real rare gem. One of the nitrogen episodes that I think is actually pretty good. At least in concept. Execution, Even though this is one of the better nitrogen episodes, it is still a nitrogen era episode, and has all the dumb hallmarks. It's very repetitive, and the people are once again just portrayed as the engine's hands. Winston's driver is clearly visible the entire runtime, and he doesn't seem to have a mind of his own.
I was trying to look for something.
Looking for things is not being really useful.
You're not gonna speak up or anything, dude? You just gonna sit there, quietly, awkwardly? Alright. But where this episode works for me is in its world building. The plot of this episode revolves around it being Sir Topham Hatt's birthday, and Salty tells everyone how, when Topham was a young man, he'd ride around in an open carriage every year on his birthday. And we get this wonderful black and white flashback to a young, early mid-20s Topham before he gained the weight. I love the attention to detail here, with a younger Edward being the engine that would take him around, sticking with the canon that Edward was one of the first engines on the railway. Winston, Sir Topham Hatt's inspection car, wants to find this old carriage, and keeps wandering off to look for it while working with Thomas.
I'm sorry, Thomas. I was looking for...
Looking for things is not being really useful.
This whole chunk of the episode is pretty sucky, honestly. It gets so repetitive, and I don't really get why Thomas gets upset. I mean, what on earth is Winston supposed to be helping him with? What do you expect him to really do, Thomas? But it does conclude on a high note. They do find the carriage, conveniently right next to the main railway line. Seriously, how has no one not spotted it before this? And they take it to the steamworks to have it spruced up before Topham sees it. Despite how repetitive the narrative gets, Winston's goal here at least was an admirable one, simply trying to do a good deed for someone.
Oh my! I remember this. Every year, on my birthday.
Nitrogen's animation got really good towards the end of its run, and there's some really nice shots in this episode. The shot of the carriage and the trees is pretty, the flashback sequence is cool, and I like the subtle shaking that Winston does when his engine's running. They don't do that in other seasons. It's the little touches like that that give the characters more life, in my opinion. Overall, this is admittedly not a great episode by any means, but definitely one with some substance and some world building. Truly a hidden gem in a rather not so great era.
Now he's back inside the sea, he's beside himself with glee beyond the seaside, inside the sea.
Toad and the Whale is such a sweet episode. Toad weirdly got a lot of love in CGI, being the star of 3 episodes. Meanwhile, his counterpart, Oliver, got pretty much nothing. I don't know what their fascination with Toad was, but hey, I'm not complaining, because all his episodes are bangers. In this one, Toad spots a beached whale at Bluff's Cove.
Look, it's a whale.
Despite his efforts, no one believes him at first. No one listens to measly break fans. When the news comes out that there is in fact a beached whale, Toad, Oliver, and the rescue teams spring into action to save it. I think what I like most about this episode is how seriously the matter is treated. They don't make light of the predicament they're in, treating the whale with the utmost care. They even say aloud that they can't do things like simply drag it back into the water.
You can't pull a whale all that way, Butch. It just won't survive.
The conflict is clear and real. The whale will not survive. I really like how they portray Toad in the CGI series. Here he's portrayed as such a doormat at first. Everyone just walks all over him and they pay him no mind. It's clear that he's kind of a lowlife in the ecosystem of the railway, He's just a measly brake van after all. So it makes him seem like even more of a hero when he keeps trying to get his ideas to save the whale herd, which ends up working. He's a fun underdog character, showing even the biggest of heroes can come from the most unlikely of places. This episode probably makes the most clever use of the rescue team's characters' abilities over any other. All of them have an essential role to play in this. Butch was going to drag the whale to sea because, he's a tow truck. Rocky's a crane, so he lifts the whale onto the flatbed. Belle uses her water cannons to keep the whale wet, etc. Toad comes up with a great idea to have the whale taken by rail to Brendam Docks. The whale is lifted onto a flatbed, and Belle follows behind, spraying water on it the whole way. This is probably the only time they've ever done something clever like this with Belle. A steam engine with water cannons attached to it is such a silly idea, but here, hey, she's actually pretty useful. The idea of a search and rescue team is such a gimmicky concept that's always felt rather forced in my opinion, so it's nice to have an episode where they're being used effectively in a more non-conventional type of emergency. Makes the whole concept of a rescue team existing feel kinda essential, I really like this episode and how serious the situation is treated, but if I were to nitpick something, it'd be how Oliver is written. At the beginning, Oliver neglects Toad and makes fun of him for thinking he saw a whale on the beach.
You'll never believe this, Duck. Toad says he's seen a whale.
That's not a very good joke.
He is proven wrong later, and he immediately apologizes for it.
Oh, I'm so sorry I doubted you.
So at this point in the episode, Oliver has learned to not take Toad's suggestions for granted. It's a nice little arc. But then later, Toad makes another suggestion of how to save the whale.
Why don't they just pick the whale up and take it to Brendam Docks?
To which Oliver says,
Oh, Toad. Let's just let the search and rescue team get on with their job.
He completely disregards him again, even though he just learned to not do that. And then when Thomas hears Toad's idea and agrees it's good, Oliver gets this little moment.
That's a brilliant idea, Toad!
It is?
What is your beef, dude? I don't know, Oliver is kind of a jerk in this episode. His little arc in the first half is fine, but I don't understand why they backtracked it in the second half. In my opinion, the story would have flowed a lot better if Oliver showed support for Toad in the second half, with him being the one that floats the idea to top him when Toad is too self-conscious to. There's no conclusion to this arc either, really, because the next time we see Oliver, he's just happy for Toad at the end. Not the best arc if you ask me. Oliver's meandering character aside, I still think this episode is really sweet, and it treats its concept with the seriousness it deserves. Beached whales are no laughing matter, and the episode does not make light of it. It's a pretty good one. Go give this one a watch.
Hello.
I guarantee all of you that Den and Dart are not a single person's favorite characters. And for good reason. They are such nobodies. They are diesels that work at the diesel works. That's it. Dart is smaller and a little grumpier and smarter, and Den is bigger and more bumbling.
I'm Den. Well, what I mean to say is...
What Den means to say is that he's the boss, and I help him a lot. I'm Dart.
Smart guy, dumb guy. That's it. That's all they had going on. At least, for a while. So consider everyone's shock when it was revealed we'd be getting an episode totally focused on the two of them in Season 19, simply called Den and Dart. And consider my shock when this ended up being one of the best episodes of the season. Den and Dart is a fantastic example of how to build up nothing characters. When you have these two blank slates of characters that always work together, what do you do with them to give them some personality? Simple. You split them up. In this episode, Mavis has an accident at Farquhar Quarry, so while she's being repaired at the diesel works, Den is sent to work at the quarry in her place. Den and Dart are worried at first, as the two are never split apart. They flounder being by themselves for a while, but with some encouragement from Toby and Mavis respectively, they both soon learn their own individual strengths. Interestingly, the previous Nitrogen era tried a similar concept to this in Season 16 with Den and Dart. In an episode that not a soul remembers called Ol' Wheezy Wobbles, Thomas enlists Den and Dart's help in fixing Ol' Wheezy the crane on Misty Island. But for some f***ing reason that isn't explained, only one can go at a time. Dart goes, but he doesn't want to fix the crane alone.
I can't fix this!
So he runs off. Then Den goes, but he doesn't want to fix the crane alone.
I can't fix him on my own.
So he runs off. And only when they're brought together can they fix Ol' Wheezy.
We're always happy to help together!
Yay! Did we learn a single thing about Den and Dart in this episode? The point I'm trying to make here is that they tried to do a thing where the two get separated in the past, but they utterly failed to elicit any sort of personality out of the two this way. And I think that's probably because Thomas is the focus character here instead of the two of them. And also just bad writing. Here, they managed to showcase what each one is like personality-wise. Dart, who is usually the leader of the two, gets depressed when he's alone, and needs a little pickup from Mavis to keep going, showing he needs Den more for moral support than anything. He's a little insecure, you know? Den, meanwhile, is never really left to his own devices, and he doesn't know his own strength. He discovers just what he's capable of when he's put to it, managing to keep the trucks in line and proves he can keep things in order just as well as Dart can. Den has more of the character arc in this episode, I think. Pairing him up with the troublesome trucks was a fun idea. Never thought we'd ever see these guys together. This is also a really good Toby and Mavis episode too. Two characters who are severely underused in CGI. I love how in control and feisty Mavis is with the quarry, and how she comforts Dart. I also really love this line from Toby describing her.
Is that how Mavis does it?
Oh, yes. She can be quite determined, you know.
This is one of Toby's best portrayals in CGI, being more of a teacher type, encouraging Den to take charge with the trucks. This is the Toby we all know and love, not the one that is scared of signals and forests. A great episode. It's a fantastic example of what the Brenner era did best, really digging into the characters and making even the most nothing ones likable. Definitely check this one out.
I was pulling into Shanghai Harbor.
Who are you talking to, Thomas?
Kenji. Kenji?
Wow, another Big World episode on this list. Imagine that. I have spoken in detail about the events of this episode before in the Sodor's Finest on Hero, so what I say here will probably be nothing new. But I still think this episode is pretty fantastic, for this is a rare episode that gives a recurring character a solid conclusion. Hero. Hero was a character introduced at the very beginning of the CGI series, in the very first CGI special, Hero of the Rails. His story is that he was built in Japan, and was brought to Sodor during its early railway days. He worked on Sodor, but started to get worn out over time. As he was from Japan, getting parts to mend him was difficult, so Hero was eventually left on a siding, and forgotten about. He was found again by Thomas, and later restored. Since then, Hero has basically become a Sodor resident, with episodes even devoted to him missing his homeland. Hero kind of disappeared from the show for a little while, and like most recurring characters, was presumed to have just been sort of phased out so they could focus efforts on other new characters and plot lines. But then, this episode came out and proved that wrong, for they actually gave Hero a conclusion. Kenji, a new electric bullet train from Japan, was brought to Sodor for a technology fair in one of the previous specials. This episode begins showing that he's still been on Sodor for a little while after the fair, being converted to battery power to haul regular trains on Sodor rails. The ship for Japan finally arrives, and it's time for Kenji to go home. However, Kenji is afraid of sailing on the ship by himself, so he runs away to hide. During Thomas's search to find him, good old Hero returns and joins the hunt. Once they find Kenji, Hero says this.
I was so worried about traveling all the way to Japan on my own.
Oh, I can travel with you.
You could?
Hero, what are you saying?
After 12 seasons of being on Sodor, Hiro is finally ready to go home, and Thomas has to deal with saying goodbye to him for the final time. The episode ends on this wonderful note of Thomas seeing the two engines off as they sail away. Appropriately, in the last season of the CGI series, the first ever CGI character takes his final leave from the show. There is no implication here that Hiro will ever return. Nah, he's gone for good, finally going back to his long-missed home. The episode is admittedly kinda rushed, and it doesn't delve that far into the deeper themes here, but I love that they had the balls to write Hiro off, and in a respectful way too. In an era of the series where continuity did not matter whatsoever, where Thomas could be on Sodor in one episode and then in India or Australia in the next, it's nice that they stuck to their guns here and wrote a conclusive arc for this Legends character. Don't get me wrong, Big World Big Adventures sucks, but there are some good stories sprinkled throughout it. I wish this was a two-parter more so than a single rushed 7-minute episode, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. If you're a Hiro fan, give this episode a watch. It's a pretty important one for him.
All aboard for a big adventure!
I'll be able to run things more efficiently from there.
When Dowager Hat's Busy Day first aired, I didn't really care for it. I thought it was a little too zany for my taste, but I warmed up to it over time and accept it for what it's meant to be, a total riff on past episodes. In this one, Sir Topham Hatt is ill, so his mother, Dowager Hat, takes on the role of controller for the day. Dowager, of course, has no idea how to run a railway, and ends up sending the wrong engines to do the wrong jobs, and chaos ensues. But being her overly confident, hoity-toity self, Dowager doesn't listen to reason from anyone, until Emily stands up to her. This whole episode is a shitpost, full stop. All the jobs Dowager sends the engines to do here are all in-jokes, full-on callouts to the stupidest of episodes in the past, such as having an engine collect a single parcel on a flatbed from the docks, hauling a blown-up balloon on a flatbed, or sending an obviously unqualified engine to pull the express. Even little passing remarks are references to more recent past episodes.
No, Jeffrey! Jeffrey? Who's Jeffrey?
This one is funny because both of these episodes were written by the same writer, Lee Pressman. Hell, even the entire plot itself is kind of a riff on a past episode, where someone who clearly isn't suited to be controller is put in the position of controller for the day, and causes chaos. You can tell that they were just kinda having fun with this one, coming up with the wackiest scenarios they could think of without going too far into cartoony territory. I love some of the trains in the background. It's like the animators went, what is the most wildest pairing of an engine and rolling stock that we can do? Salty with the Globe car from Emily Saves the World, yes. Diesel and the dinosaur car from season 18, perfect. I don't know, Airy with the motherfucking slip coaches, excellent. The episode kind of falls into that, what's happening is stupid, but we're getting away with it by acknowledging it's stupid territory. But it's all in good fun, so I give it a pass. What really works about this episode is how it all wraps up. Once the wackiness ends, Emily steps up to the plate and puts everything right. It actually becomes a rather good Emily episode, putting that leader knows best part of her character in the spotlight.
Dowager Hat, there are certain engines that are suitable for certain jobs, and other engines that are not.
I love this part when she's blunt with Dowager and tells her off. It's very much in line with her earlier appearances where she did the same thing. Emily is a character that became very meandering in CGI in my opinion, where it felt like none of the writers had really any idea of what to do with her. She's had quite a few episodes that were rather meta, playing on the fact that she's never done anything special like the other main characters. She feels like a doormat sometimes, rather self-conscious. This time, we get an episode where Emily feels like the version of Emily that we know and love, and I love seeing her take charge for once, instead of being so down on herself. This is a very funny episode. If you're like me and you dislike how stupid the previous eras got, then you'll probably get a kick out of this one. Check it out.
Watch out, Bertie! Coming through!
Stay where you are, Bertie! Don't move!
All right, I won't move then. I wonder for how long.
2 Winston eps on this list. That's a weird coincidence. When I was writing the script for this, I questioned which one I should keep on this over the other, but in the end I decided to keep them both, because they're both good. We can have 2 Winston episodes, who cares, right? This was one of the first episodes from the Renaissance era to come out, and I think it was the most impressive of that first batch. This is a story that feels straight out of classic Thomas. A character expresses a desire to do something that they know is dangerous.
Driver says I don't need him now. We mustn't go past it. That's orders. Why?
But it would be so exciting to go forwards for a change instead of always seeing things sliding away from me.
An opportunity presents itself, and the character takes it. They enjoy it at first, but slowly start to regret it, and they learn their lesson from the resulting incident and ridicule. See, Thomas comes to breakfast, Percy takes the plunge, Busy going backwards, etc. This time, it's Winston we focus on, a guy who has had very little time in the spotlight prior to this. Sir Topham Hatt is not the best driver, and Winston is tired of being knocked around by him. He wishes he could go off on his own for once.
Sometimes I wish I could go off without a driver.
Oh, don't be silly, Winston. You need a driver.
One day, Topham, being the bad driver he is, accidentally forgets to put Winston's brake on. And instead of alerting him, Winston says nothing, and uses the opportunity to roll off on his own.
Oh.
He enjoys the ride at first, but when he realizes he can't brake himself, starts to get scared. It becomes an exciting chase down the main line to catch Winston before he crashes. I think what really made this episode special, to me at least, is that Winston was not fully in the wrong here. In other episodes that use this formula, it's always just the one character who accepts the full blame. Not here though.
I mean, you forgot to put on the brakes, sir.
Oh my.
Topham was just as much in the wrong as Winston was, and he owns up to it.
You're absolutely right, Winston. I should have put on the brake.
I love these episodes where Sir Topham Hatt, the authority figure the audience looks up to, is portrayed as not above making mistakes of his own. See the Fogman or PA problems that we just talked about in the previous video. It really humanizes the guy, and both characters here learn a lesson by the end. This is an exciting, fast-paced, well-structured story that feels very Thomas. I could see this exact story working in Season 5 or Season 6 with very little of it changed. Winston in general kind of feels like a character from Season 6. I feel like I can easily picture Gallière's styled concept art of him. Another absolute banger from the CGI series.
But Winston didn't mind. He was glad to have the Fat Controller back in the driving seat once again.
If you want a heartwarming episode that truly captures the Christmas spirit, look no further than Season 20's Letters to Santa. This is a Percy and Harold episode, the first ever one we've gotten since Season 6. Yeah, how crazy is that? 14 seasons since their last tiff, writer Helen Farrell decided it was time to check back in on these two, complete with a beautifully animated flashback to the two's race from Season 2, where their rivalry began. I love this sequence, not just because it's referencing an old episode, but because of how it's animated. All the backgrounds have this watercolor aesthetic to them, and every shot is based on an illustration from the original book. Is that faithful to the source material or what? It's Christmas time on Sodor. Percy always pulls the mail train, so naturally he is the most busy at this time of year, hauling more parcels and letters than usual across the island. Harold, being his haughty, egotistical self, asks Percy if he wants help, but does so in a way that feels like he's belittling Percy's abilities.
Perhaps you'd like me to take the letters to Vicarstown. Snow on the rails is no problem for me.
Thank you, but it's my job to deliver the mail.
I only meant that you seem to be struggling.
I am not struggling.
Percy, of course, takes offense to this, and being the vengeful little devil he is, decides to ignore Harold the next time he speaks up to him. This doesn't play out the way Percy had hoped, as he is halted by a snowdrift blocking the line. To Percy's reluctance, his mail is given to Harold to take abroad. However, a blizzard sweeps through that night that Harold has to fly through, and when Percy finds out that Harold still hasn't returned home the next day, begins to worry about him. Percy drops everything and does the right thing. He sets off on a search for the lost Harold. Percy finds Harold on the mainland, crash-landed in a field, out of fuel. One good turn deserves another though, and Percy gets more fuel for him to fly safely home. This episode, more than most, exemplifies what the true meaning of Christmas is, without having that stereotypical Hallmark feeling. This is a time of year when you should be selfless, putting aside differences and petty rivalries, and be there for those in need, no matter what they've done to you. And what a better pairing to focus that sentiment on than the on-again, off-again best frenemies, Percy and Harold. It's actually amazing to me that they decided to focus the story on these two this late in the game. The show has strayed so far from its roots by this point that I thought this relationship was one that was lost to time. It was one I certainly didn't think would be touched on again. I thought it reached its climax back in Season 6. So imagine how surprised and delighted I was when this came out. Harold is such a non-character in CGI. He's just the helicopter, and not much more. So it's nice to see him with a personality again. I totally forgot his character was supposed to be kinda arrogant and belittling. It's good to see that remembered. I think Letters to Santa is a very heartwarming episode. Definitely a sleeper hit that no one talks about. I can't really blame the fans for that one though. It was kind of overshadowed by all the other amazing bangers we got in Season 20. When December rolls around this year, add this episode to your Christmas playlist.
Right, hand me that shovel, my good man, and let's get going. We've no time to lose.
Holy moly, a third Big World episode on this list? Someone check me into a mental institution. I think I might actually be going insane. In all seriousness though, Thomas and the Royal Engine is excellent. I liked it from the first time I saw it. In what was a really poor era of the show, this mini special felt very much out of the Renaissance period. It's heartwarming, it's totally character driven, and most importantly, it's a fitting closer. This is a mini special that was made in honor of the Railway Series' 75th anniversary in 2020, a celebration of all of Thomas's history up to that point, and the task of writing it was given to Michael White, a fellow fan who writes for the show. In this special, Sir Topham Hatt is to be given a special award for his services to the railways by Queen Elizabeth II herself. And by request of Prince Charles, Thomas is to take him to London to receive it. The special follows the two's journey to London and the misadventures and incidents that they have along the way. Thomas meets a familiar face or two, including Beresford of all characters.
It is! It's my little friend Thomas.
Because if there's anyone I wanted to see again, it was him. And a new one, a big steam engine named Duchess, who is rather rude to him at first. They come across each other again when Duchess breaks down, and the duo decide to help her out. Unbeknownst to them, she is the Royal Engine, and was hauling the Queen and the Prince themselves.
Thomas, do you know what train you've rescued? It's the Royal Train. What?
As far as I'm aware, this is the final canonical event in Thomas and Friends before the All Engines Go reboot, making this essentially the series finale. And I think Michael's choice to have it be focused on Thomas and Topham, instead of some big event that involves all the engines together, to be rather inspired, and quite fitting, actually. At the end of the day, who has Thomas and Friends always been about? It's always been about Thomas, obviously, but besides him, which character appears the most often? has had the most episode appearances over anyone. Sir Topham Hatt, right. The whole entire first story arc of the show was Thomas trying to prove to him that he was a worthy engine, and once he did, Topham dubbed him really useful and gave him a branch line. So, how do you bring that full circle? You end the series with Thomas, once again, proving how indispensable he is to Sir Topham Hatt. It's even more appropriate when you think about how the 70th anniversary special was about Thomas proving himself to Topham for the first time, and the 75th was the final time. There are so many references and callbacks in the special to every era. Topham being Thomas's fireman is a reference to season 5.
Then I shall be your fireman.
I'm afraid our fireman's taken ill. Then I'll be your fireman, sighed Sir Topham Hatt. Thomas was excited.
They mentioned the Queen having been to Sodor all the way back in season 4.
Is she coming to see us again?
Who will be pulling her train?
Henry and Gordon referenced the events of Gordon Goes Foreign from the Railway series.
London's all wrong, answered Gordon sadly. They've changed it. It isn't King's Cross anymore. It's St. Pancras.
Not the station names again, Gordon. I just wish they would make up their minds on what to call London Station.
There's a good few callbacks and sets reused from Journey Beyond Sodor. Sir Topham Hatt mixes up auspicious with suspicious.
Honored to be here on this, suspicious, auspicious occasion.
Which is something that Percy does in the final ever Railway series story, Centenary. Thomas mentions Henry being rebuilt at Crewe.
Perhaps this is Crewe, where Henry went to be repaired.
Which is, of course, a reference to the Flying Kipper. Thomas says,
Little engines can do big things!
Which, of course, is a nod to Thomas and the Magic Railroad.
Come on, lady! Little engines can do big things!
Prince Charles is seen holding a faceless toy of Thomas, which is a reference to Wilbert Awdry's own Thomas model. And hell, they even acknowledge the fact the Railway series books exist within the canon of the CGI series.
From what my son has been reading in the books written about it, your Northwestern Railway is well known for helping out those in need.
References, callbacks, nods galore. Normally I would say that this is shameless fan service, but it's so appropriate here. This is a celebration of 75 years of the series, not just the Railway series, or just the show. So it celebrates events from the entirety of Thomas's run, from callbacks to the events in the books, the model series, the CGI series, and even the first movie. I think the Royal Engine is a truly well-packaged special. I personally think that it would have benefited from being a bit longer, but a snappy 22 minutes works just fine. It is, in my opinion, the best thing to come out of the Big World, Big Adventures era. Thomas and the Royal Engine is a very fitting finale for the series, and I highly recommend giving it a watch. And there we go! 10 more hidden gems from CGI Thomas that you should definitely check out. Even the very worst eras of this show have their moments. If you're watching this video but have not checked out the first one, well, what are you doing? Go watch that, and then sit down and have yourself a 20-episode Thomas marathon. Just want to give another big thank you to my patrons for their continued support. They actually voted for this video, so I hope all of you that voted for it enjoyed it. If you choose to go over to Patreon and pledge, you'll also get to take part in voting for new videos. You get to take part in the monthly Q&A, you get your name on the side of the screen just like you see now, and if you pledge to the highest tier, you'll get 2-day early access to all new videos before they come out. Some pretty nice perks there. Click the link in the description if you'd like to take part. And that is all from me this week, folks. Hope you all have an excellent day, and I will see you all in the next one.